So there are four main factors affecting the climate of an area. Those are the latitude, the altitude, distance from the ocean, and the topography. Let us have the factor number 1, which is the latitude. Latitude are the lines that is parallel to the equator, and this latitudinal position of a specific country defines its climate. So why does this latitudinal position of a particular place defines its climate? This latitude has a reference point of 0 degrees, which is called equator. This equator receives the direct sunlight coming from the sun. That's why areas that is found on equator or near the equator will have its warm temperature, and it's considered as the warmest places in the earth. That's why the tropical climate zone has its warm and humid climate, because they are found on the equator. And since equator is exposed to too much sunlight, it gives us the warm climate. Therefore, as the latitude increases, the temperature decreases. As we go farther from the equator, which is receiving the direct sunlight from the sun, then the places far from the equator have lesser sunlight, which gives them cooler temperature. So that is how latitude affects the climate of a specific area. You just take note that the equator always receives the direct sunlight from the sun, which gives us the warm climate, and the areas far from the equator have cooler temperature because of the less sunlight they receive. Another factor that affects the climate of an area is the altitude, which is our factor number 2. Altitude defines as the elevation above sea level. Kung gaano kataas ang level ng isang lugar. Meaning to say, the elevation of a specific area or place affects the temperature. How? So if you would notice, many Filipinos, especially living in Luzon, would like to go to Baguio or even Tagaytay. Why? Because Tagaytay and Baguio have cooler temperature compared to other places in Luzon. Why? Pero nasa Pilipinas din naman. Bakit malamig ang temperatura sa Baguio at sa Tagaytay? Because of its altitude or elevation. As the altitude affecting the climate of an area, the higher the altitude or the elevation of a specific place, it would have cooler temperature. Kapag mataas ang pwesto ng isang lugar, ang temperaturang mararanasan nito ay malamig kumpara sa mga places na mabababa ang pwesto. So meaning to say, Baguio and Tagaytay has higher elevation compared to other places. Diba, pag pumunta ka nga sa Tagaytay, matatanaw mo sa baba yung Taal volcano. Ibig sabihin, mataas ang pwesto mo. At dahil mataas ang pwesto ng isang lugar, it would experience cooler temperature. And those areas that is in the lower elevation or altitude will have its warm temperature. As you go up into 1,000 meter, the temperature will have a drop of 6.5 degrees Celsius. Ibig sabihin, kapag tumaas ka ng 1,000 meters, bababa ang temperatura ng 6.5 at mas lalamig pa ang temperatura kapag nasa mas mataas kang level. So that is how the altitude affects the climate of an area. The higher the places, the lower its temperature. The lower the place, the higher its temperature. Another factor affecting the climate is the distance from the ocean. The distance of a specific place from the ocean greatly affects its climate. How? Okay, one ability of water has is absorption of too much heat. When the water absorbs too much heat, water can control and cool down the temperature of a specific area. That is why living near an ocean could give you a cooler temperature. Now, places without bodies of water tend to have higher temperature than those areas that is near from the ocean. So ngayon, alam mo na kung bakit kahit napakainit sa beach ay maaliwalas ang pakiramdam because the water from the ocean controls the temperature in the area. So going back when we discovered that Philippines is found on the tropical climate zone near the equator where there is direct sunlight from the sun and the temperature is warm, kung bakit hindi masyado pa rin ganun kainit in the Philippines because if you would notice, Philippines ay napapaliputan ng mga dagat. At itong mga dagat na to can control the heat that the Philippines would receive. Kaya hindi rin ganun kainit in the Philippines compared to other countries na nasa tropical climate zone because we are lucky that we are surrounded by many oceans. So you will just take note that mas malapit sa ocean would have cooler temperature, farther from the ocean will have higher temperature. And the last factor that affects the climate is topography. An example of topography is having mountains. These mountains also greatly affects the climate of a specific area. So how do mountains affect the climate of a specific area? This mountain has two sides, the windward and the leeward side. On the windward side of the mountain, it is where precipitation happens. Dito sa side na to ay lugar kung saan nagkakaroon ng ulan. While on the other side, on the leeward side, there will be no precipitation or less precipitation. Why? The windward side of the mountain is the one that faces the wind. On this side, there is formation of clouds and becomes rain. On this side of the mountain, there is always rainfall, and this rainfall gives the cool temperature in this area. While on the other hand, on the other side, the leeward side of the mountain, there will be no formation of clouds. And since there is no formation of clouds, it has lesser precipitation. Hindi masyadong umuulan sa leeward side. On this leeward side, it is usually dry and warm. And the dry region on the leeward side is called rain shadow. How does topography affects the climate of an area? So if your area is facing the wind on the windward side, you have cooler temperature. While on the other hand, kung nandun ka naman sa side ng leeward, then you will experience warm and dry temperature. Those are the different factors that affects the climate of an area and how does it affects the climate. Hope you have learned something today on our outdoor setup for the video lesson today about the climate. Goodbye and thank you for listening.